Before we begin today's episode, just a reminder to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you enjoy this episode. Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth were best friends who did everything together, so it was no surprise when both picked up and moved from Colorado to Arizona. Staying with Diana's older sister, the two got jobs and began exploring their newfound freedom. Sadly, within months of arriving, both would mysteriously vanish. They were last seen at a local convenience store a few blocks from the apartment they shared. After speaking with a mysterious man driving a blue truck, the two women hopped in and disappeared. 3 agonizing months later, their remains were found in a desolate, remote area of the desert. While the killer has remained elusive, police have reason to believe he may still be in the area and, in fact, may have visited the site as years after their deaths, someone walked up to a memorial erected by the families and removed the photos of Diana and Jennifer. Could this have been a random act, or is it possible that the killer is keeping tabs on the case? This is Trace Evidence, episode 128, The Murder of Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth. Welcome to Trace Evidence. I'm your host, Stephen Pacheco. Today we examine the terribly tragic story of two best friends. Before getting into the case, just a few notes about the show. Trace Evidence is a weekly true crime podcast focused on unsolved murders and disappearances. You can follow the show on social media on Twitter at TraceEvPod, Instagram at TraceEvidencePod, or by searching Facebook for Trace Evidence. The show is also available on MeWe and Minds. If you're interested in supporting the show and getting some Trace Evidence merch, there's a Patreon available at patreon.com/traceevidence, or you can donate via PayPal. Visit trace-evidence.com for all social media links, donation options, and contact information. You can submit case suggestions directly through the website or email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com. Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth moved from Colorado to Arizona to begin a new chapter in their lives. Unfortunately, a killer had something else in mind. This is episode 128, The Murder of Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth. There aren't many places in the world more different than Glendale, Arizona, and Loveland, Colorado. While the summer months in Loveland offer warm temperatures and beautiful vistas, it's the winter that comes hammering down, bringing in frigid temperatures, burying the area in an average of 54 inches of snow annually. A warm summer day in Loveland isn't all that different from an average day in Glendale, though when the summer sun rises overhead, it isn't uncommon for temperatures to hover near triple digits. For two young women who had grown up experiencing season after season of Colorado snowfall, the temptation of year-round warmth without a hint of snow could certainly have been yet another attribute that made a change of scenery all the more appealing. Not long after finishing up high school, Diana Shawcroft was making plans to leave behind the snowy slopes for the sandy spread of Glendale. It came as no surprise to anyone who knew Diana that she wouldn't be traveling alone. Instead, she would be joined by her dearest friend, Jennifer Lueth. The two women had met during their early days in middle school and had become inseparable over the years. Many have gone on to describe their friendship as more like sisterhood, with the two being incredibly devoted to their friendship and to one another. Jennifer, it said, wanted to accompany her friend not just to join in on the fun, but also to support her through a difficult time. Jennifer's father, Bob, later stated, quote, "You never want to see your kid go away, but she was 19 and she went down there strictly for her friend who she felt was in trouble. Jennifer was the type when someone was in need, she was there to help." End quote. Diana's father, Roger, later described Diana and Jennifer's relationship as being closer than most sisters. The two complemented one another in different ways, being opposite sides of the same coin. Roger would later tell Unsolved Mysteries, quote, Jenny was a little more flirtatious, Diana was a little quieter, more shy, but she's the one that basically took care of both of them, end quote. The move was an exciting opportunity, not just to present the two best friends with a dramatic change of scenery, but also the chance to head out on their own, to experience life on their own terms. Neither had ever lived away from home, and both were looking to seize the chance to see more of the world and experience the freedom of making their own choices without the influence of their parents or any rules which might bog them down. The circumstances wouldn't exactly be ideal. However, as Diana and Jennifer would be moving into a small, two-bedroom apartment of Diana's older sister, Christina, such tight living quarters could be breeding ground for frustration and confrontation, and according to Christina, there were certainly arguments from time to time. Despite the challenges, both Diana and Jennifer began taking steps to secure their position in Glendale and to provide themselves with more opportunities to make friends and have fun. Shortly after arriving in Arizona, Diana picked up a job working as a customer service representative for the credit company Discover Card, while Jennifer was hired on at a local Burger King. They may not have been dream jobs, but it was a foot in the door and a way to make money while looking for something better. Both kept in touch with family, updating them on progress and discussing adjusting to their new environments. Jennifer, though, barely ever went for more than a day without picking up the phone and chatting with her parents, Deborah and Bob, who were still back in Loveland. According to Christina, the two women quickly began making friends. It was the spring of 1996. Both Diana and Jennifer were 19, and they were doing what a lot of people their age were doing, going to parties, meeting new people, hanging out at local hotspots. Their outings had been successful. They were meeting new people every day, and there was never an opportune moment missed. Christina would later tell Unsolved Mysteries, quote, They were pretty open to just about anybody. They liked to hang out, they liked to have lots of friends, but they liked to go. They wanted to be doing something all the time. They didn't care if it was 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon, end quote. It seems apparent that Diana and Jennifer had made quite an impact, gathering up new friends and fun times wherever they went. They were living their dream in a sense, but soon that free-spirited adventure would turn into a horrifying nightmare. On the evening of Friday, May 24th, Diana and Jennifer were both home at the apartment they shared with Christina when an argument broke out. The argument, described as taking place between Jennifer and Christina, was heated enough for the two younger women to decide they were going to take a walk to cool off and grab some supplies. Reportedly, Diana and Jennifer told Christina that they were going to take a quick walk to a nearby convenience store for cigarettes and soda, and they'd be back. The convenience store, located at 5800 West Camelback Road, was just a 2-block walk from the Cedar Creek Apartments on North 57th Avenue. Both women walked out of the apartment dressed in casual clothes, tank tops and shorts and sandals, taking with them only a few dollars in change, just enough to get the few items they were planning. The two left the apartment complex at approximately 6:50 p.m. It's a short walk, just over 0.3 of a mile, taking approximately 7 minutes to complete, heading south on North 57th, turning west on Camelback Road for 2 blocks until reaching a mini-mart at the corner of Camelback and 59th. It wasn't a far-off destination, and it was certainly one both women were familiar with as they had frequented the convenience store in the past. Christina didn't think much of the trip and later explained, quote, They didn't take anything with them, and they never went anywhere without their makeup, so that's what made me think they were coming right back, end quote. However, neither Diana or Jennifer would ever return from this impromptu early evening trip, and the circumstances of their disappearance has baffled investigators and their families for over 2 decades. While neither returned that night, there wasn't initially anything to be concerned about. It was a weekend and the two had been going out a lot, making new friends and partying. It wasn't completely out of the ordinary for them to spend a night out. However, when Christina awoke the next day and discovered that they still hadn't returned, she grew concerned. That concern became more urgent when she looked around the apartment and noted not what was missing, but what had been left behind. Aside from their makeup, which they apparently never went anywhere without, both had left behind their purses, which contained uncashed paychecks. Now, growing worried, Christina picked up the phone and called her parents. At the time, Roger Shawcroft was living locally in Arizona, while their mother Kathy was living out of the state. The Shawcroft family began searching the area, looking for anywhere that Diana and Jennifer could have gone. It was Memorial Day weekend, and it was considered a possibility that they could have gone to some parties or perhaps met up with friends and decided to spend the night with them. Unfortunately, no one knew for sure, and because the two young women had been making so many new friends and hanging out with so many different people, it was difficult to know exactly where to look. Not to mention, a lot of the friends they had made weren't yet known to their family, so trying to track down potential leads was challenging to say the least. According to Kim Pasqualini, the founder of the National Center for Missing Adults, she was contacted very early on to assist with resources for the search. In an article she wrote discussing the case, she made note that early on the family was told that a lot of local kids went down to Mexico to celebrate that weekend at the beach. The border being just over a 2-hour drive south, this was considered a good possibility for a short period of time. When no signs of Diana or Jennifer could be found, the Glendale police were contacted and the two were officially reported missing. Despite the fact that they were both adults and only had been missing since Friday night, police were quick to get involved and 2 officers were dispatched to take the official missing persons report. It was during this time that police were informed of their destination the night they disappeared, the convenience store just a few blocks away. When officers arrived to investigate, they were able to locate the clerk who had been working that night, and he was able to confirm that they had in fact made it to the store. According to the clerk, Diana and Jennifer had arrived at the store at approximately 7 p.m., which lines up with the timeline of them leaving the apartment around 6:50. The clerk went on to tell investigators that both women entered the store and together purchased a few packs of cigarettes and some soda. However, while the women had told Christina they'd be picking up items and returning, upon exiting the store, they didn't actually go anywhere. An article in the Tucson Citizen goes on to explain that Diana and Jennifer exited the store and then took a seat out front, apparently lighting up a few cigarettes and drinking some of the soda they had just purchased. Over the course of the next 2 hours, the clerk noted that both women remained in the same place, seemingly hanging out in the parking lot and killing time. It has since been theorized that the two may have been trying to wait, cooling off before heading back to the apartment, or maybe they could have been waiting for someone. There's no mention in any official report of either woman using a phone, and it being 1996, neither of them had a cell phone. However, approximately 2 hours after arriving at the store, the clerk noted that a faded blue pickup truck pulled into the parking lot and both women approached, having a conversation with the driver. Despite not knowing the driver's identity, the clerk was able to give a description, describing him as being a white male in his mid-30s with a blonde mullet-style haircut and what has been described as approximately a week's worth of growth of facial hair. Some newspaper articles vary in the description, saying that the man had a full mustache instead. The man was wearing a grease-stained blue denim jacket and appeared to have several scratches on his right arm. In terms of the vehicle, it was described as being a faded blue pickup, believed to be a late-model Chevy. 2 additional witnesses would later contact police, saying that they were present at the store that evening and also saw the 2 women speaking with the driver. They were able to expand the vehicle description, adding that it had tinted windows, chrome bumpers, a broken right taillight, and several dents, according to the Arizona Republic. After several minutes of speaking with the driver while standing in the parking lot, witnesses saw both women enter the vehicle shortly before it drove off out of the area. Whether or not either woman knew the driver remains unclear, but both families agree neither would have accepted a ride from a total stranger. Deborah Lueth, Jennifer's mother, later told Unsolved Mysteries, quote, "I believe she knew this person because she would never get into a vehicle with a stranger. She just wouldn't do it. She wasn't the kind that would hitchhike or do anything like that. She was very careful and cautious." End quote. Investigators, however, noted that while this may be true, Diana and Jennifer had met a lot of new people in the time they lived in the area, and it was entirely possible the driver could have been someone they had previously met, but perhaps didn't know very well. It was theorized they could have spent so much time at the convenience store that night because maybe they were waiting for this person. A massive search was launched looking for any trace of the women. Kim Pasqualini, through her organization, began production on thousands of flyers while also utilizing local contacts to begin searches. Flyers were put up on local businesses, street signs, and power poles all around the area, while volunteers handed them out to locals on the street. Searches were conducted in multiple areas, from local bars and clubs to attractions popular for gatherings such as Bartlett Lake and Lake Pleasant, both within an hour's drive from downtown Glendale. Despite these initial ground searches, no trace of Diana or Jennifer could be found. One particular area of interest early on was the Agua Fria River, which stretches 40 miles from Lake Pleasant north of the city, south through the city to the Gila River, where it meets at Estrella Mountain Regional Park. According to the Arizona Republic, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office joined in on the search, utilizing their Air Posse, a search and rescue group made up of volunteer aviators. A week after the disappearance, members of the Air Posse were flying over the area and scouring the Agua Fria River bottom for any signs, though again, nothing was found. Interestingly, an article in the Arizona Republic notes that this area was focused on because Diana and Jennifer might have gone to a party there with an acquaintance, though there is no further explanation for that theory. The longer the search went on and the further it expanded, the absence of any evidence or sightings was becoming a growing concern for investigators and the families. When Jennifer's parents were notified, which, depending on your source, was either the day the women were reported missing or the following Monday, they immediately came to town where they would stay for months, spending every waking hour searching for their daughter. The focus slowly turned towards the overwhelming expanse of the desert, but the Lueths weren't going to be deterred. Deborah later told the Arizona Republic, quote, "If I have to walk every inch of the desert and turn every grain of sand, we're going to do it. And Jenny knows that. She knows that in her heart." End quote. Deborah and Bob devoted themselves to the search. Investigating on their own, they conducted interviews with anyone who believed they might have seen Jennifer. Their search took them all across the state, though their leads were never any stronger than those of police. The Lueth family felt frustrated with the way police had handled their search, contacting the state's attorney general's office requesting that they take over instead. Unfortunately, each subsequent search yielded the same results: no sign of Diana or Jennifer. As time began passing, both families struggled to cling to the hope that they'd be able to bring their daughters back, safe and sound. Soon, search efforts from law enforcement began to fizzle, and police focused on the only true clue they had in the case: the mysterious man driving the faded blue truck. Despite extensive media coverage of Diana and Jennifer's disappearance, they were not able to locate the vehicle or its driver. It seemed that just as Diana and Jennifer had disappeared, so had the man last seen in their company. While police could not officially state that the driver of the truck was involved in the disappearance, they desperately wanted to speak with him and find out where he might have taken the two women that night. 3 long months would pass before investigators or family received any news, and unfortunately when they did, it would be tragic. The horrible news would come on Saturday, August 24th, almost exactly 3 months since Diana and Jennifer had been seen. 2 bow hunters moving through a vast expanse of desert in Yavapai County came across 2 sets of human remains. The remains were found near a ravine, almost literally in the middle of nowhere, and were later confirmed to be the bodies of Diana and Jennifer through dental x-rays. The remote location was 100 miles north of where they had last been seen, approximately 16 miles from the nearest interstate, and accessible only by vehicles which were capable of driving through desert roads. Investigators have been extremely tight-lipped about what exactly was discovered there. However, it has been said that the remains were predominantly skeletal, though it has also been stated that the bodies were stacked in a sense, with Diana lying on top of Jennifer. To this day, investigators have never revealed their cause of death. Some articles explain this was due to the level of decomposition, though in others it's expressed that police have not shared this information in order to maintain the integrity of their investigation. Since it's such a remote location, police have said a lot of local residents aren't even aware of its existence. Investigators began to theorize that whoever had committed this heinous crime was either a local or someone who was highly familiar with the area and terrain, perhaps someone who had hunted there before. Investigator Ted Simmons of the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office later explained, quote, "We feel that this person has probably been to this area or frequented this area or certainly is aware of this area in some way by their own four-wheeling or hunting or at least some personal knowledge of the area." End quote. Police also stated it was their belief that Diana and Jennifer had likely been killed within hours of disappearing and had been in that location where they were found almost the entire time they had been missing. While few details of the scene are known for sure, in fact, the exact location at the time was known only to investigators and the families, there are few details which have come out over the years. Considering the positioning of the body, investigators have expressed that they believe Diana and Jennifer were placed where they were found, and this suggests that they were either brought there by someone who was very strong enough to carry two bodies down into a ravine, or perhaps there was more than one person involved. Police combed through the surrounding area looking for any clues, even utilizing a metal detector. Ultimately, they've stated that it was their belief that the murders were conducted elsewhere, and that this remote location was not where either woman had been killed. In addition to the difficulty a single person would have had bringing the remains to that location, investigators and the families acknowledged that it would have been difficult for just one person to subdue both women. Jennifer's father, when speaking to Unsolved Mysteries, expanded on this, saying, quote, "Jennifer was a strong girl, and she was a scrapper if she needed to be. It wouldn't be easy for one person to overpower Jennifer alone, but with two of them, it's just sort of inconceivable to me that one person was able to do that to two girls." End quote. Both families were devastated by the news. They no longer had to confront the endless unknowing, the sleepless nights of wondering where their daughters could be, but now they had an even darker reality to accept. There was an answer, finally, but not the answer they had hoped for, and in the vacuum left behind, both families became intently focused on finding who had stolen their daughters. According to all information which has ever been made public, it doesn't appear that investigators were able to gather any significant evidence which would point them in the direction of a suspect, and so their attention turned once again to the mysterious truck driver. In October of 1996, 5 months after Diana and Jennifer disappeared and just over a month after their bodies had been recovered, Officer Jim Toomey of the Glendale Police Department spoke at a press conference during which time a new, more detailed composite drawing of the driver was revealed. Police issued a plea to the public for information, noting that no detail was too small. It was hoped that someone might call in with new information, and while many calls did come in, none of those calls seemed to supply the answers police were searching for. Considering the likelihood that the killer was local and may well have been driving a distinctive truck, there didn't seem to be anyone who knew exactly who he was, despite a local company offering a $25,000 reward. Unfortunately, the case had grown cold within days of the disappearance and had never truly heated up. While the discovery of their remains had reinvigorated the investigation, and it was hoped new data would develop, investigators were still back to square one trying to determine who may have been involved and why this crime happened. In December of 1996, just a few months after the horrible truth was discovered, the Shawcroft family set off on a trek into the desert to create a memorial at the location where Diana and Jennifer had been found. Joined by Kim Pasqualini and 4 reporters from local news outlets, the group went out to the spot bringing along 2 redwood crosses, engraved with Diana and Jennifer's names, as well as a sturdy wooden picture frame holding images of each. It took approximately an hour to reach the location once the group left the main road. The two crosses were erected, and news media filmed tearful pleas from the Shawcroft family for any information related to who had killed their daughter. The photos of Diana and Jennifer were placed between the two crosses, and a small memorial was held. The press ran with the story, and for a time, there was a resurgence of searches and a hunt for a killer. Attention on the case, though, would slowly fade. While for both the Shawcroft and Lueth families the tragedy was fresh and they were determined to find answers, others slowly began moving on, and soon mentions of Diana and Jennifer became fewer and fewer. Police had not given up on the case, but had very little to work with. In hopes that the killer might return to the location, officers would periodically watch the ridgeline, even going out there to look for any signs that someone had come through. They focused on important dates: Diana and Jennifer's birthdays, the day they went missing, the day they were found, anniversaries a killer might celebrate. Since they had never officially released the exact location to the public, it was believed that only the killer might come back there. However, after several months, police visits began tapering off. Slowly, days turned to weeks and weeks to months. 4 long years would pass before police would make a disturbing discovery. On September 29, 2000, police went back out into the desert to return to the location of the memorial. While initially everything appeared to be exactly as it had been left, investigators quickly noticed that something was missing. While the crosses still stood in place, lying between them was an empty picture frame. It appeared that at some point in the past 4 years, someone had come to the memorial location and physically removed both Diana and Jennifer's photo from the frame, discarding it down to the ground beside one of the crosses. Police immediately theorized that this was not just a random occurrence. The location had never been revealed, and it was considered an extremely remote area difficult to get to. Beyond that, most people are unlikely to remove photos from a memorial site, though that can't be completely ruled out. The question remains, though, is it possible that the person or persons responsible for this horrible crime came back to revel in their brutal acts, and in doing so, decided to take a souvenir? That's a question both investigators and the families have been asking for 20 years. Diana's father, Roger, later theorized, quote, "Nothing else seemed to be disturbed, and it definitely raised questions as to who would want the pictures, who would go to that much effort to go back in as far as it is, get the pictures and take them. Hard to even imagine who it would be or why they would do it, unless it was the perpetrator." End quote. Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth were last seen entering a faded blue pickup truck in the parking lot of a convenience store on the corner of 5800 West Camelback Road and 59th Avenue at approximately 9 p.m. on the evening of Friday, May 24, 1996. The man driving the truck has been described as Caucasian, in his mid-30s with blonde hair kept in a mullet-style cut. It's strongly believed that this man was either directly connected to the murders or may have information about who committed this terrible crime. It's considered very likely that whoever the man is, he was either then or previously had been local to the area and may still live somewhere in the state of Arizona. 2 young women set off on an adventure to live their lives to the fullest and were violently stolen from their families. All of their hopes and dreams were destroyed by a vicious killer who may still yet have returned to the very place where he left them more than 20 years earlier. Somewhere out there, someone has the answers and possesses the ability to bring a killer to justice. While police maintain that this is an open investigation, they have shared very little in terms of details of this case. One vital piece of information has been revealed over the past 2 decades. While the exact location of this discovery has never been specified, investigators have acknowledged that hair and fibers were collected, and they may hold a secret which DNA technology can unlock. Sadly, Nothing can bring back Diana or Jennifer. However, perhaps they can still yet receive justice by seeing their killer named and arrested. For the families, though, the pain has been overwhelming. When asked about the loss of her daughter, Deborah Lueth replied, quote, "It was just so devastating for us, and we miss her so. Our biggest worry is that these girls would be forgotten, and nobody will continue to look for whoever did this, and that person will do this to somebody else's daughter." Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth set off to make their own lives in a completely different place. Moving away from the cold winters to the arid climate of Arizona, both fell in love with the valley and hoped to build their futures there. It's every parent's worst nightmare. Your child grows up, moves out, and under incredibly mysterious circumstances, vanishes. Months later, Shawcroft and Lueth families discovered the horrifying truth. Someone had murdered their daughters, and to this day he is still out there. The only real indication of who may have committed the crime comes from eyewitness accounts of a store clerk and a few patrons, who all saw the same man driving the same truck. They all witnessed Diana and Jennifer getting in, and from there to this day, no one knows exactly what happened. Anytime someone vanishes, it's a disturbing situation, but when two people disappear together, there seems to be some extra added horror. We have a tendency to feel safer with someone else, to find strength in numbers, but for some sick and twisted people, they will always find a way to impress their terrible desires on the innocent. How is it possible that after all these years, not a single person has ever come forward with the identity or a solid clue as to the driver's identity? How can someone spend enough time in an area to know even the most remote reaches of the desert, but not leave an impression strong enough for someone to identify them? The fact of the matter is, it's highly unlikely someone out there doesn't know exactly who committed this crime. There's really only two branches to the theories revolving around this case, and in some ways those theories are intertwined. It comes down to a debate which has been happening since the day Diana and Jennifer disappeared. Did the two women get into a truck with a complete stranger, believing that they would be safe? Or is it possible that they were taken and killed by someone they knew? While the families have argued neither woman would just get into a vehicle with someone they didn't know, police have acknowledged that they'd been meeting a lot of new people in the area, and it was entirely possible that it could have been someone they knew, at least to some degree, just not someone they knew well enough. There's been a lot of debate about the night Diana and Jennifer disappeared. We know that an argument took place back at the apartment, and the two women went to the local convenience store for cigarettes and soda. The question which has always lingered is, why did they stay there? If they were just leaving for a few minutes to grab a few items and blow off some steam, why did they hang out in the convenience store parking lot for nearly 2 hours? The answer to that may never be known, but everyone has their own theories. Some believe it wasn't planned, the two were just hanging out together. I certainly spent some time in my late teens doing something similar. Living in a town stuck between the ages of 18 and 21, it can be difficult to find something to do or somewhere to go, especially when you're new. You're not old enough to go to a lot of the bars and clubs your friends might, and so you have to find entertainment where you can. Others, though, believe that there's a chance that Diana and Jennifer were waiting for someone. Maybe one of them made a call after they'd bought supplies, or maybe along the way before they even arrived. Maybe there was someone they were looking to hang out with or get a ride from. Of course, there are a lot of people who feel this is highly unlikely. They left dressed casually, not how they normally dress to go out. They didn't bring a change of clothing with them, no extra money, nothing beyond the clothes on their backs, a few bucks which they spent at the store. If the plan was to meet someone or go somewhere else, why wouldn't they have brought something more with them? It doesn't make a lot of sense. It was Memorial Day weekend, there were likely a lot of parties happening, and they've both been described as enjoying going out and socializing, so why not head back to the apartment, grab some supplies, or bring them with you in the first place? The fact of the matter is, we may never know the answers to those questions. All we know for sure is that after hanging out in the parking lot for about 2 hours, a blue truck pulled in and both women approached the vehicle. After several minutes of chatting back and forth, Diana and Jennifer got into the truck and disappeared. Police have since said they believe the women were likely killed the night they vanished, so the question becomes, why did they get into that truck in the first place? Beginning with the theory that they didn't know the driver, there's a lot of possibilities. I know that both families firmly believe neither of their daughters would have gotten into a truck with a total stranger, but that doesn't mean it couldn't have happened that way. Maybe the guy drove up and struck up conversation and they began chatting. After how many minutes of talking with someone would you feel comfortable hanging out with them? They'd been making friends all over town, and it's very probable that at some point they'd met someone while they were out and then went somewhere with them, whether it was to a different bar, a party, or just to hang out. How many of us have made similar stupid choices in our youth and only managed to make it home because on that particular occasion, our bad choice wasn't a fatal one? The possibilities are sort of endless. I know that when I was in my late teens hanging out in 7-Eleven parking lots with my friends, a lot of times we'd approach adults and offer them cash to buy us some alcohol. Sometimes our female friends would do this as males were more likely to buy alcohol for them than for us. Other times we were just looking for something to do, and if someone mentioned a party or a gathering at a certain location, we might try to get there. I don't think it's entirely out of the question that this guy could have chatted with Diana and Jennifer and maybe mentioned he was on his way to a party or knew where one was happening. It's entirely possible that they could have gotten in thinking they were heading off for a fun night that eventually turned into the last night of their lives. Everything about it is speculative at best, but you can likely imagine a scenario where this would happen. Maybe the fear and hesitance of a stranger is somewhat mitigated when you're not alone. The fact of the matter is, if Diana and Jennifer had wanted to go home, they could have, any time during that 2-hour span. It was a 7-minute walk. But they didn't. They just hung around, killing time, talking and joking while hanging out in the parking lot. Christina told Unsolved Mysteries that they were always looking for something fun to do, whether it was early in the day or extremely late at night. Maybe this guy made them an offer that sounded good. Maybe he mentioned a name or a place they were familiar with, and they thought they'd be safe. Most people, though, tend to agree that there's a good chance Diana and Jennifer knew the man they went with that night. It would make a lot more sense for them to go over to the truck and start chatting. Of course, from the convenience store information we've been given, it doesn't sound like the driver ever exited his vehicle or went into the store itself or any of the other stores in that area. So the question becomes, who drives into the parking lot of a convenience store if they aren't planning to go in? Maybe someone who's been asked to come there. And if that's the case, then the idea that Diana and Jennifer knew their killer is much more likely. It's just never made sense to me that someone who knew them would be pulling into that parking lot, see them, chat with them, and then give them a ride somewhere, but never actually get out of their truck. If I went to a local convenience store and saw one of my friends just sitting outside, I'd probably talk with them, but I'd likely park my car and walk over to chat before or after going into the store to grab whatever I came there for. The only way I can imagine myself pulling up, chatting with friends, and then leaving without getting out of my vehicle and never going inside the store is if someone called me and asked me to come pick them up and I wasn't going there in the first place. We know that Diana and Jennifer had met a lot of people in the time they had been in Arizona. Police later said they spent a lot of time around different new males. Sometimes it was just hanging out, sometimes it may have gone as far as seeing each other for a few dates. As far as we know, there was never anyone significant enough for either of them to have been in a relationship, or if there was, no one ever mentioned it. Unfortunately, that opens a lot of doors because it's unlikely anyone has ever fully determined all of the people they hung out with. It seems like it wasn't a planned thing. If Diana and Jennifer had known they were going to call someone to hang out that night, they'd likely have brought more things with them. According to Christina, they never went anywhere without their makeup, so it seems unlikely that they planned this trip from the get-go. Maybe the argument was hot enough that they just left in a rush, and it was only later they decided to call around and see if anyone could hang out. Maybe they just didn't want to go home that night and run the risk of another argument, or maybe they decided they didn't want to waste a Friday night just hanging out at home. So there's really two scenarios here. Either they contacted someone and asked to hang out, or they just happened to run into someone they knew and decided to go along. The latter seems a little less likely, considering the fact that the guy never left his truck. But sure, maybe he's driving by, recognizes them, and decides to stop and see what they're up to. Either way, it seems a lot more likely that they knew this guy in some way. Maybe they'd met him before, maybe they had mutual friends. It's really difficult to speculate about, as almost anything is possible. What happened after they were picked up, though, could tell a different story. While police have never been able to discover this guy's identity, there's nothing which 100% guarantees that he is the one responsible for their deaths. Maybe he did give them a ride to another part of town or to a party. Maybe they ended up meeting up with someone else and something went wrong afterward. This guy could know police were looking for him, but thought that he'd be considered a suspect, so he never came forward. However, there's absolutely the possibility that this guy had no intentions of giving them a ride anywhere and all along had something else in mind. It could have been murder from moment one. I don't want to speculate too much about it, but I suppose we have to try and get into the mind of the driver. What are the chances that some guy's just driving around at night looking for women to pick up so he can murder them? I have no doubt there is someone out there, somewhere in this world, doing that very thing at this very moment. But how many of those guys target convenience stores where there are customers and employees all in plain view? You'd imagine he'd look for more remote areas or places around the city where he's less likely to be seen, but that didn't happen here. So either this guy was incredibly fearless, believing no one would notice, or he wasn't directly from that area and figured that by the time anyone gave a description of him and his truck, he'd be long gone. It's really difficult to determine what might have happened here because you have two intelligent young women, but you also have family and friends describing them as somewhat naive. It's contradictory because on one hand, friends and family say they're too intelligent to get into a truck with a stranger, but then other people are saying that they saw the best in everyone and were open to hanging out with all different types of people, the good and the bad. 3 long months passed, and then the horrifying discovery. 16 miles from the nearest main road in the middle of a desert accessible only by someone driving an appropriate vehicle, and even then it wasn't an easy ride. It seems quite apparent that police are correct in their assessment that whoever put Diana and Jennifer where they were found was very familiar with that area and knew there was an extremely low chance anyone was going to see them out there, especially in the middle of the night. While that leads some to believe the killer had to be local, it also opens the possibility that the killer knew the area well, but wasn't exactly directly local. I know plenty of hunting areas that are secluded that I could go to right now, but some of them are a good hour or hour and a half away. Because the killer knew the location doesn't mean he lived in Glendale or even nearby Prescott. He could have lived 2 hours away. I suppose, though, if that were the case, it seems unlikely that either Diana or Jennifer would have known him. Then again, if you look at the timeline, there's an interesting possibility. Let's assume just for a moment that Diana and Jennifer knew their killer and that they may have actually called him to pick them up that night. He didn't show up for nearly 2 hours. Maybe that's because he lived quite a drive away. Unfortunately, there are just so many questions in this case and no answers. Did the killer know the area really well and therefore choose that location specifically? Or did he simply know there was a dirt road that led deep into the desert and he drove until he couldn't see the lights of society anymore? There's been a lot of discussion about the possibility that the killer had someone else with him, at least in terms of dumping the bodies, because of how difficult it would have been for someone to lay them there in that place by themselves. Is it possible that the killer didn't know that location, but knew someone who would be able to take him someplace where it was unlikely they'd be found? I don't think that can be dismissed out of hand. I think there's a good chance that more than one person was involved, at least in terms of the aftermath. Whether or not the killer had a partner or more than one killer, and they committed the crime together, it seems highly unlikely that this is something he'd have been able to pull off alone. If he had been alone, I'd imagine he'd be dumping the body somewhere that was much more easy to access, maybe a few hundred yards off the dirt road itself. The truth is, if more than one person was involved, then we could be chasing a killer who was driving the truck, but maybe was not the one who chose that location. That being said, while I agree with investigators that the person who stole the photos was likely the killer, there remains the possibility that it could have been someone else. What do you think? Was this someone Diana and Jennifer knew? Was it a complete stranger? Was it a planned out double murder, or did something else happen and murder became the cover? It's been 24 years since Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth were abducted and murdered. This very month is coming up on the 20th anniversary of the day their photos were discovered to be missing. For more than 2 decades, 2 families have been struggling to accept the harshness of reality that a sick and twisted individual murdered 2 young women who had their whole lives ahead of them, and while they've been buried for more than 20 years, somewhere their killer still walks the streets. Were Diana and Jennifer this man's only victims, or is it possible that there are more families seeking answers about their own missing loved ones that could one day be tied to this killer? That desert could possibly hold many more secrets. Unfortunately, without new evidence, new tips, or an outright confession, the murders of Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth will remain open, unsolved, and very cold. If you're looking for more information about the murder of Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth, there are some resources available online, but honestly, I was surprised by the lack of information available. Unsolved Mysteries ran a segment on this case, and there are some modern newspaper articles available, but there are large gaps between the 90s and today. If you have any information about the murder of Diana Shawcroft and Jennifer Lueth, please contact the Glendale Police Department at 623-930-3000. Their case is number 96-47770. What do you believe happened? Tweet me at TraceEvPod, email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com, message me on Instagram at TraceEvidencePod, or comment in the Facebook group. I'd like to take a moment now to thank our amazing Patreon producers: Alicia Lorraine, Aurora K, Brittany Bivens, Brian Kemmerling, Christine Greco, Krista Colvin, D. Earthy, Diane Dyson, Eamon Brady, Guilherme Pinto, James, Jason Yeager, Jennifer Winkler, Joanne Berkowitz, Kate Much, Megan Cotter, Michael Graves, Nick Mohar Schurz, Pamela Coburn, Quinn McBreen, Roberta Jansen, Sarah Mascaritolo, Tara Doble, Travis Skepko, Stephanie Joyner, Stephanie Eve, Tom Archer, and Tracy Woods. You're all amazing, and your contributions are greatly appreciated, as are all patrons. If you're interested in supporting Trace Evidence, please visit patreon.com/traceevidence or visit trace-evidence.com for further information. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen, and I hope you'll join me next week for another unsolved case on the next episode of Trace Evidence.